All right. So I believe that y'all can see me. I'm getting some thumbs up from some people. Perfect. It's all great. Whew, thank God. Okay. Thank you guys for staying on. All right. So we are going to go straight to the second document. So for those of you guys that are seeing it, there is part 2 in the document that says perfect. Thank you so much, John Leslie, for the thumbs up. Everyone is amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so let's get to it because we got a lot of great stuff to go over. And as I mentioned last week, if you didn't get a chance, go to the second document. Perfect. We got some thumbs up in the building. I'm grateful, I'm grateful, I'm grateful. So let's get to document 2, you guys. There are all the prayers, everything we talked about from before upstairs. I'm sure you guys heard me, but as I was mentioning, talking about different types of loss, primary and secondary loss. So make sure you go through the first document. And if you don't have it, feel free to email me at hberhane@fcbcnyc.org if you're not able to access it, and I will send it to you via email. Perfect. So as we go into the second document here, let me know for those of you guys that have opened it again, because we are going to go right in. Okay. So I need some thumbs up for those of you guys that have document 2 opened up, right? Document 2, which is part 2 of our ways of grieving, right? So we're going to talk about grief and loss today. And today we're going to talk about the tasks of mourning, right? And then we're going to talk about coping mechanisms, and then how different coping mechanisms and how they work and how they show up for us. Okay. So once again, for those of you guys in the chat group, let me know if you got the document opened up so I can get the ball rolling. Okay. I'm not seeing any thumbs up yet, but I'm going to get it popping and get it started. So we are going to start off by talking about the tasks of mourning. Perfect. Got it. I just got one person. That's all I needed. So in the document, as you can read, it says that this tasks of mourning. So a lot of times we hear about the mourning process, right? And as I mentioned earlier, mourning is different from grief in the sense of mourning is how you get to the place where you start to accept and have the loss integrated into your life. Okay. And so when we have that concept and we have the concept of how the tasks for mourning, a lot of the times we've heard the stages of grief and loss, right? Which are denial, anger, sadness, bargaining, and acceptance. And that was started by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who talked about the different stages of grief. And that's a very common thing that I've heard. I know a lot of us have heard about it, to talk about what the different stages of grief are. But there's also another way that we can understand grief that is separate from the stages. And a lot of the reasons why people don't oftentimes, some therapists, like I said, therapists don't all agree. We have different methods. But a lot of the reasons why sometimes therapists want to use a different method that's not connected to the stages of grief is because not everybody goes through all the stages, right? They're not linear. And sometimes you might go from anger, you might not have denial, you might really accept the grief, you might not experience any denial. You might go to a place of sadness and go straight to acceptance, right? And so this is a different concept where we talk about the tasks of mourning. And this was started by William Worden, who talks about this concept. And I think that there are different mediating factors that can kind of shift the way that we understand mourning as it relates to what's happening in this season for COVID. So the first task, if you guys can see it on your screen, is the one you have to accept the reality of the loss, right? And I know that sounds so much easier said than done, right? The concept of accepting the reality of the loss, but it's something that we have to kind of get to. And so that's the first thing, right? Accepting the fact that whatever it is that you've lost, be it a loved one, be it a relationship, be it a job, whatever it is that you want to identify as a loss, you have to first accept the reality that this happened. And not completing the task looks like staying with the feelings of disbelief. And I think in particular with this season, what complicates things, and I'll talk a little bit more about that afterwards in the next in the next section, is that not being able to kind of see, for example, right? I talked about this last week. If you never got to see your loved one before they passed, it can make the concept and the reality of them being gone hard to accept, right? And we talk about this idea of ambiguous loss. So ambiguous loss can look like a loss that you can't necessarily pinpoint. There's disenfranchised loss. There's so many different types. And for ambiguous loss, that particularly, I mentioned last week, it shows up for people whose family members are incarcerated, right? So this parent, this individual that you love is here, but you can't physically see them, right? And so it can be hard to accept that reality. And so if you sit with the disbelief for a really long time, right, and you don't go past this sort of task, you can kind of stay here and then you can't get to task number 2. And so accepting the reality of the loss can definitely be difficult, but that's definitely the first task that we want to sort of go through. The second task, the second one is the processing the pain of the grief, right? So I mentioned this last week. It is extremely hard for people to process grief, right? It is so much easier for us to want to avoid our feelings because we say we don't want to fall apart. I've had so many clients who said to me in the past, Minister Heaven, I don't want to fall apart. I don't want to cry. I don't know how I'm going to, I don't want to feel this stuff. It's so much easier for me to do all of these other things, right? People like to, and there's so many ways that we can self-medicate to numb the pain. But if you cut off one's feelings and avoid them, you're in essence, what you're doing is you're delaying the grief, right? You're delaying the grief. You can create complicated grief because you are not dealing with the feelings and avoiding them. Number 2 is adjusting to a world without the person, place, or thing externally, internally, and spiritually, right? So what does that mean? So when you lose something or someone, your world externally changes, right? Be it a job, be it a person, your world drastically changes. It's no longer the same. And so adjusting to the external things that impact the loss in our lives is really, really, really important. I just want to make sure those of you guys just continue to put something in the chat if you guys can hear me and you can see me, and just put a thumbs up in agreement, or if you have any questions as we're going along, it's very, very, very helpful for me. To adjust to a world without the person or place or thing. And the task and not completing the task, it's rejecting or not accepting those adjustments. So internally, right? So for an internal accepting that task would look like if you had a relationship, you were married and a loved one passed, your husband or your spouse passed away, or your parent, right? And that parent was the person that encouraged you and gave you self-esteem and was the one that helped you to see yourself in a really powerful way. And when you lose that person, you then begin to start to shake your identity, right? That happens with job loss too. So internally, you start to question yourself. You start to question your worth. You start to question your value. And so you have to adjust internally. What does this mean for me in this season now that this thing is no longer here, right? And the last one is spiritually. So, as many of you know, we've talked about this in the past, but when you lose something significant in your life, however you deem it to be significant, spiritually, your world starts to change. And I gave this example one time when I preached when my cousin's father passed away. And when he passed away, what was one of the hardest things for me was my concept of miracle shifted, right? I prayed for a miracle and the miracle didn't happen. And I struggled with understanding God and God's concept of intervening in certain situations. Now, as an adult, I've since grown and adjusted my understanding of the fact that God has the freedom to act and to not act, right? And that's a difficult concept to understand, right? We always say, like, why didn't God has the freedom to act and not to act. And so for me, I had to adjust myself spiritually to understand this concept and how I understood God moving forward after experiencing a loss like that in our family. And not completing the task looks like rejecting or not accepting those adjustments, right? And so life is changing and things need to change. And for some of us, right, if you've lost a loved one and they used to be the one that used to pay the bills, and you're just like, you know what, I didn't do this before, and now I have to be the one to step up and do this. But not accepting that as the adjustment letting that kind of sit by the wayside, or just not engaging it, not engaging that shift and that change, and not accepting these new roles in your life, really kind of stops and hinders the second task, which is the part of integrating this into your life. Now, the fourth and the final task is finding a way to remember and integrate the loss while moving forward. So it's so hard to say this, but life continues. And I know once you've experienced a really tough loss, I've had this happen to me before, where I've gone outside and you see the world is still moving around you. And you want to scream out to the world, like, I just lost this person. I just lost my job. I just lost this thing. Your world, your internal world, your external world has literally been shaken and shifted. And so what happens is you start to go to these, you literally start to see this world is continuing on, right? And so integrating that loss, because at the end of the day, remembrance is important, right? You can remember the memories. Pastor Mike mentioned this to me. He said it way more eloquent than I'm about to say it. But he talked about one of the greatest gifts that God gives us is the gift of memory. And the gift of memory allows us to, although sometimes it can be painful, is the memories, we can carry them with us. They're never gone. They're never lost, right? So, I think about people who, like I mentioned last week, who are graduating and not able to experience the moment of graduation, that significant loss. However, the memories that they carried, the memories they have from their 3 or 4 years experiences of being at school, I mean, at the end of the day, those are the things that I cherish the most, the friendships that I created in that space. And so we have to find a way to use the memories and integrate them in our lives as we move forward and as we shift and as we change. Now, not completing that task, if you look at the document, it says that you're not living or engaging in life. And that can look like whatever it can look like for you. I can't say for you what not living or engaging with life is. You know what that is. You know what it is. And that can be through God speaking with you, or you speaking with a therapist. Is if you are not engaging or living your life, living the vision that God has called out for you, then you have essentially not found a way to remember and integrate that loss. Now, as I mentioned before, do not feel overwhelmed if you find yourself stuck in a certain place, right? Because there are so many mediating factors that make these tasks difficult, right? And we're going to go into the second portion. So one, give yourself kindness right now. Say thank you to your body. Thank your spirit. Thank your heart for allowing yourself to be here to deal with this today. But do not feel an overwhelming sense of anxiety if you find yourself stuck in a certain space. Things are complicated. Life is complicated. Life is complicated right now. And so we really want to make sure we give ourselves kindness. So make sure you say the mantra, right? I'm going to be kind to myself. Insert name and be kind to yourself. So we have the mediators for mourning. And I think I talked about this. I said mourning is unique and complicated due in large parts, the mediators, the things that happen that impact how that process for mourning that I mentioned earlier. These are the different mediating factors that kind of make it difficult and challenging. And we want to honor that in this space, right? And so this is really important to be able to name it, because for some people, they can say, well, I don't understand why it's been so hard for me. Listen, there are these mediating factors that can change and shift the way that you, the way that you deal with the loss. So the kinship, who died, right? Now, this really matters. If you've been married to someone for 50 plus years, this is your spouse. If you had a job or a business for 50 plus years, and then one day it's all gone, right? That thing that's lost, that thing that's passed away, your relationship to that thing impacts how you mourn, right? It's going to be way more difficult for you if it's a person or your spouse that you've been with for such a long time, if it's a child. So this is definitely, and therapists will, we talk through that, right? So we talk about the relationship that you have and who that person was that passed away. The nature of the attachment, right? So we all have different attachments to certain people, right? So you can have a relationship with your job. You might not necessarily love it, but it paid the bills. And so when you lose the job, you may not necessarily feel the same sort of grief as someone who, say, loved their job and really was putting a lot of time and investment into it and felt like it was their purpose or their calling. So your nature, the way that you are attached to that thing, will definitely impact how you mourn it and the severity of how sort of that mourning process and what the difficulties might be as you're kind of experiencing the different tasks. So I'm going through a lot. So once again, you guys, make sure you say something in the comment section if you're in agreement, just to kind of let me know. If you need me to slow down or if you need me to kind of go back up to something, let me know. I'm looking at the comments. So make sure you kind of give me some good feedback. How the person died, right? And this is only, and I want to put it specific. You can put how the person died, or you can put how you lost your job, right? All of these, that really impacts. And I think that there's, when you have people who suddenly pass away, right? There's oftentimes we understand a path of life, right? That you live, that you go through your childhood, that you go through your teenage years, your college years, your adulthood, you become old, and then sort of the nature of how life happens, it happens. We're all going to leave this earth. There's something that we can deny. But what's really, really helpful is what's important is how, right? So when you have a traumatic loss where it was sudden, where you wake up one morning, and unfortunately, I had a friend who told me about a man who had recently lost his wife, who had came home and had found her, and she was no longer breathing. And that can be extremely difficult when you are dealing with something like that, right? So how the person or how the thing, whatever it is that you've lost, how it happens, definitely impacts how you mourn that, right? And so be kind to yourself, especially for those of you guys, like I said, during the season of COVID, so many things have happened so rapidly, so quickly. You've never really had a chance to say goodbye to these people. And so how this happens right now, if you're thinking about it, right, with COVID, you wake up one morning and you see your loved one, they're okay, and they quickly deteriorate. And it just feels like it just hits you like a ton of bricks. It happened so quickly. And so how that happened really does impact it. And so it's not just limited on the documents, it's how the person died, but that's kind of based off of sort of the way it's understood from clinical understanding when we're talking about loss. But you can put how, whatever it is that you lost, how that thing has happened has definitely will impact you. Historical antecedents, right? And so that really just means, in layman's terms, has the person experienced loss previously? If you have experienced loss previously, sometimes you have grown a resiliency to understanding and experiencing it. And so because you've experienced it once before, sometimes it can, not all the time. Like I said, everything is contextual. Sometimes it can be a little bit easier because you've gone through the pain, you've expected it, you know what that process looks like, you've gone through it, and you've experienced a sense of courage having gone through that grief, right? And so it's really important to understand have you experienced loss? So for some of you guys, if you've experienced loss previously, you can share in the comments, do you find that it's been easier for you when you experience loss again, whatever that type of loss may be, right? I've lost a job before, and I know that I've gotten back up on my feet afterwards. It was difficult in that season. I struggled, right? I struggled to find myself. I struggled to understand who I was. I found myself in a state of, sadness. I cried for a couple of days. But having lost it once before, I know that I will be okay. So when I lose another job moving forward, I'll definitely experience the same sort of sadness. However, I will know, based on my resiliency and sort of how things happened before, that things will be better, right? And so if this is your first loss, it can definitely be so much more harder. And sometimes we don't even notice that we've experienced loss before. So all of us, the majority of the time, have experienced loss, but especially if you're talking about children and they lose a parent at a young age, it can be really, really difficult in that moment, right? Because they're grappling with the first ever loss, the major loss that they've experienced in their life. And so that definitely becomes a mediating factor in how the mourning process happens. So this is good. I see some people saying, keep going. During COVID, yes, it feels like I've become numb to it. it can definitely happen. And that's where sort of the delayed grief will come. And I'm speaking specifically to Shaylata. Yes. So Rachel has said, easier as I get older, stronger, and I have many reference points. That's great. Yes. So like I said, it gets easier. It's never easy, but it does get a little bit easier. And then there are some people who have experienced loss before, and it's just been too much, and they've experienced so much loss that sometimes, like I said, they can become numb to it. And I think that can sometimes be some of the unfortunate ways of how, when you experience multiple sets of losses, you can kind of come to a place of expectation and numbness. And so you really have to be intentional, right, in that situation for someone who's numb to walk through that process, right, to allow yourself to feel an intentionality for how you feel with that. Personality traits, right? So all of us, like I mentioned last week, I'm a crier. I cry. I'm emotional. I'm a Cancer. I don't know what that is about Cancers, but we are emotional individuals. And so because we're emotional individuals, our emotions take over. So that personality, that becomes so, that can be a little bit difficult for us. And we form very unique attachments to people. And so our personalities, who we are, if someone is not necessarily an emotional person or doesn't really form strong attachments, there are so many things about our personalities that impact how we experience the loss as well. And so one, we don't want to ever, it's not a negative thing, right? But it's something to acknowledge. And in that acknowledgement, you know better about understanding yourself and how that will impact how you move, right? So we have age and gender, right? So that also impacts things. It's said oftentimes, I don't like to be gendered, but it is said oftentimes that men tend to experience more anger in their grief, right? So if you're thinking about the mourning process, and sort of, or the stages of grief, living in sort of that place of anger can kind of make it difficult if you don't deal with the anger. If you don't deal with what you're feeling, if you don't say it or share it, and that can be kind of, like I said, these are sort of things that are known or things that people say about certain groups. But if you don't deal with it, it can be really hard in how you move forward. So definitely age and gender. AQ has said, and Sharon has said, I'm a crier. And sometimes, listen, crying is not a weak thing, you guys. It is actually extremely cathartic. I literally feel like a lighter person when I cry. So for those of us that are criers, shout out to us. And then we have coping styles, right? And I'm going to go deeply into that, but I'm just going to name them right now, which is problem-solving coping, avoidant emotional coping, and active emotional coping. We're going to go over that a little bit more. So a lot of us have coping styles that we don't even recognize. And I'm going to give you an opportunity to share about how you think your coping style shows up, right? Attachment style, and we all form different attachment styles. Some of us have healthier attachment styles. Some of us have unhealthy attachment styles to people and things. And that really forms based on our early relationships with our parents, right? If you have a great relationship and a healthy, strong relationship with your parents, that can create a great attachment. Sometimes you can create a too strong of attachment, right? If you had a parent that was always allowing you to be close and coddling you, you can create an attachment that later on in life, when you lose that parent, right? When the loss of that parent happens, it becomes so overwhelming and so difficult because of the way that the form of the attachment that you had with that parent. And so that can happen with a job, that can happen with anything, right? And so understanding what are our attachment styles? How do we attach ourselves to people? Are we someone that it's hard for us to let go, right? Is our attachments connected to our identity, right? The things that we attach ourselves, do we see ourselves in those things? And so when we lose them, it becomes really hard. Our world is just like completely shaken up. Perfect. I'm glad that people are saying that this is good and helpful. Trina said crying is a Gemini thing too. I believe so. So, and then the last thing is our cognitive style. A lot of us have different ways that our brain works. And that's the beauty of how God created us, that our brain is different. And so because our brain is different, some of us are extremely optimistic people. I met those folks in life, right? They're just always happy. And you're just like, bruh, it is not like, Like, what is so exciting about today? Right. And you tend to have some folks that are more, that contemplate a lot, right? You see them. My father is a contemplative person. When he's just kind of sitting there, I know he's thinking. He doesn't talk that much sometimes, but he's someone that contemplates a lot. I tend to sometimes for myself, I think a lot. I tend to ruminate on things, good and bad. I tend to like focus on them. I tend to be like, oh, how could I have done X, Y, and Z better? And so based on your cognitive style about how do you kind of like how your brain functions and how you kind of cognitively think about your life, this can also impact it, right? So if you tend to be an optimistic person, the mourning process can be very difficult because it can really shift your optimism, or your optimism can work in your favor, right? And you can start to begin to see the positives, right? Despite the fact that you've experienced this loss, you can still see the positives and how in that moment, right? You can say, wow, I might have lost this job, but I'm grateful for all the lessons that I learned that I will be able to take to my next job, right? That's what an optimistic person does. Some of us that are not as optimistic will be like, we lost this job. I don't know what I'm going to do, right? And so that can become a little bit difficult. And once again, no shaming about your styles and who you are, personalities, but it's about acknowledging and knowing and becoming self-aware so that when you go through a grieving process or a mourning process, you can understand yourself a little bit better and maybe also why certain tasks are a little bit difficult for you. But once again, we're all different. So I want to take this opportunity and invitation, and we're going to do this for like 3 minutes because, we're on a time crunch. And I want to make sure that I let y'all go so y'all can go to sleep. But I want you to take this opportunity to identify some of the mediators that have shown up for you in your previous experience with loss. So right now, based on the ones that I mentioned, the 9 things that I mentioned as mediators, what are some of the things that has shown up for you that you feel like has impacted how you've mourned, right? And the second one can be, if you don't have something that relates to an experience from past loss, something that right now, what are some normal mediators? As I mentioned, those are all normal, that has shown up for you during this time of COVID, right? And so whatever's shown up for you during this time of COVID, what are some of the things that have made it difficult? I would say difficult, that have made it a little more challenging, or things that have impacted your process. So I'm going to go into the chat box. So I'm looking down. So if you see me, we have some folks who have said, my attachment style was a bit unhealthy for me. And that Rachel mentioned that. First of all, once again, thank you guys so much for being so honest. But your attachment styles definitely can make that more difficult. So Shay has said that I'm a bit of 2, so problem solving and active emotional coping. Y'all read ahead in advance, just by the way, because that's the only way y'all would know. Cognitive, Rachel has mentioned that she's optimistic, more and more with faith. And so that's really, really good. So that can definitely kind of work in your favor during this season, right? Especially during COVID. We need some optimistic folk. We really appreciate you folks with optimism. And so Marcy has mentioned that she has lost 5 family members starting in November, and not having the energy to mourn. I'm in a space that I'm numb to where I see myself. And I think, and I think to Marcy, I want to give you some words of encouragement. It is okay to be where you are. And I talked about this last week, and I hope you guys can go back to the document from part 1, but it really talks about how the different ways that grief can show up and where we are. And I want to make sure you can be able to identify that. And when you deal with multiple losses back to back, it's extremely difficult. It's exhausting. It's tiring. And give yourself grace in this season or during this time to say, in due time, I'm going to deal with each loss. But that happens when you're ready, right? You don't have to force yourself to be ready. But it is good to engage in conversation about the loss, right? So especially for those of us that find ourselves numb, talking about it, right? Talking about it, journaling about it can be really helpful. And I'll get to that a little bit more about our coping styles. So Rachel has mentioned mediators 2, 3, 5, 7, 8, and 9. Listen, I'm with you on all those numbers. I think I might be all them and more. Thank you guys for uplifting our sister in prayer during this time. It's important. And this is the beauty of community, right? To be able to share and to name what we're feeling and to be supported during this time. So thank you guys for mentioning it, for sharing where you guys see the different mediating factors for your emotions, for how it impacts the mourning process. So the last and the most important part that we're going to touch on, we're going to stay on this part because I think someone had mentioned about the same transition, just clarifying what that meant for that comment. So we have coping styles and techniques. So this is the meat of it, right? Not the meat of it, I would actually say, because all of it has been really, really great information to be able to kind of help give you language to understand where you are. So coping, we hear it all the time, right? What is coping? How are you coping? And I'm like, what does that even mean, right? Yes, no shaming is important. Listen, you cry and sometimes you're happy. You go through your ups and downs. But coping is how one shifts their thoughts, actions, and behaviors when dealing with both external and internal stressful situations. Let me say it one more time. Coping is how one shifts their thoughts, actions, and behaviors when dealing with both external and internal stressful situations. And grief and loss clearly is considered an external stressor that literally shifts our entire world. And so when we insert a coping mechanism, it's that thing that shifts how we experience that loss, how we go through that mourning process. And so having sort of healthy coping mechanisms is really, really important. And I put this in the document. I put this in asterisks in the stars. Coping styles will vary. It's not going to work for everyone. So if I tell you today to journal, for someone that might be like the best thing for how they deal with their grief. For someone else, that might not work, right? They may not be someone that likes to write. They may not be someone to put their pen to paper, but they might be a drawer, right? They might be someone that's artistic. And so art, right? Drawing, creating a video, whatever form of art, outlet, dancing can be the way that you deal and cope with the grief. So once again, it's not one size fits all. Everyone is going to be different. And that's true for our life in general, right? We all have different ways that we cope. I like to exercise, right? So exercise helps me to release all of my anger and my frustration and my emotions. So now the coping functions. This is important, right? So we want to identify how we cope first and foremost, right? So the first one is problem-solving coping. And we tend to utilize this, right, when we're trying to deal with just a particular problem. And the problem, and not say the problem, but some of the challenges that comes with that is that means we're just focusing on that one thing at that moment. Like, I just need to figure out how to cope with this particular problem, and that's it. Not necessarily kind of delve deeper in sort of what the underlying issues are. Active emotional coping, and this is the most effective way to deal with external stressors in general, not only grief and loss, but in general. And it's an intentionality. It's intentional. It's how one intentionally utilizes behavioral and psychological strategies to change how one both feels, experiences, or views the loss, right? Let me say that one more time. It is the most effective way to deal with these external stressors. And you are intentionally, keyword intention, I've been saying that all season, intentionality, behavioral and psychological strategies to change how you feel, experience, or view the loss. Keyword intentional. There's an intentionality that has to happen in our act, and that invites hurt. Active emotional coping, be it the most effective way, is the most courageous way. Because it means that you have to go through the pain. Not to say that you're not courageous by just being, but to get to the place where you deal with it, you have to be intentional about how you want to heal. Healing is the new black. Healing does not happen without intentionality, you guys. So an example of active emotional coping is redefinition. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but the individuals, and this is what studies have shown, is that people who have the skill set of redefinition, right, the ability to see a positive or redemptive quality in the event, reframing the moment, right? And I mentioned that earlier. So I talked about this concept of I lost my job, but I'm grateful for the relationships that I formed, right? I'm grateful for the people that I met. I'm grateful for the lifelong friendships. I'm grateful for the fact that I've learned so many lessons and I can take those to my next place, right? That's reframing, that's redefinition of how you understand the loss. And so for those of us that are able to kind of utilize that skill set, it can really help us in our active emotional coping. And then the last one, which tends to be the least effective. I never like to use language about the worst way or the bad way or whatever, because that can kind of lead into shaming. Because like I said, grief and loss is not an easy thing. However, you have the power. You are capable. You are capable. I want to encourage you that today. You are a warrior. You're a storm stiller. You have the power within you. God sees you. God has emboldened you. And then you have avoidant emotional coping, and it's the least effective way to get you to the place of healing. And this is really just a part where the main word is avoidance. You just don't want to deal with it. So you find all the different ways. I had a client one time who to not feel the pain of the loss of two very important people in her life. She, this person, he or she, I don't want to say names, he or she would use other ways to self-medicate, right? So a lot of us do this. We will drink, or we will indulge in other activities. I don't want to mention what they are, but and that's a way for us to numb our pain, right? You don't want to feel it. And so avoiding it kind of leads to loss. The denial portion of it, right? And I want to say some of it can be okay because you go through that process of denial, right? We all go through a denial phase. It's a part of one of the stages. And so it is normal. However, it can only work for a short period of time. Eventually, you will have to deal with it. You will. But for a short period of time, and I want to say this, and I think I was thinking of an example of how if you lose a loved one, but you have to take care of your family, right? You lost a loved one. And I think about like Vanessa Bryant, Kobe Bryant's wife, who lost two very important people in her life, but she doesn't have an option not to be a mother. She still has 3 beautiful daughters that she still has to show up for. And there are probably some days and some moments for her, it may just be easier to put the loss to the side because she needs to show up for her kids. I know a lot of parents have done that before. You have to show up for your kids. And in the interim, it's fine. It's okay if you want to show up that way. But eventually, in order for me to show up the best way for your kids, having integrated this experience into your life, you'll have to deal with it and you can't avoid it. So we want to honor and uplift those of you guys today who may feel like you're in that place. In the interim, it will help, but we want to get you to a place where you deal with it head on. So I have some folks. So we have some good, Rachel has mentioned that she used to be avoidant. And I'm assuming you're probably having gotten to a good place now. We all avoid. I've done it before too. You're just like, look, right now I don't have the time. Right now I got so much on my plate. I got so many things that are happening. I cannot deal with it in this moment, and that is okay. But be intentional to say, body, spirit, whatever, insert your name, heaven, I'm gonna get to this because you deserve it. Your body, your spirit, your heart deserves to heal. And so we are going to get to some coping techniques, right? And I want to highlight one of my friends. We consult, social workers and clinicians consult with one another. And then she and I were talking, and I wanted to make sure I got an exhaustive, list of techniques. And I spoke with Pastor Kendra today, who phenomenal clinician at the Hope Center. Shout out to the Hope Center. And I also spoke to my spiritual father today as well, who's a clinical psychologist. And I was like, look, y'all, I want to make sure, what are all the different techniques that you utilize for coping with your clients when you work with them? And so they shared some with me. And then my friend Tiffany mentioned a really dope comment on here. So I hope you guys can see it. And I said, how would you, and she said, coping. She said, it doesn't have to be fancy, right? I know sometimes when we think about the concept of therapy, we're like, oh, it's just going to be this really, just kind of sort of big thing and this lofty idea. No, it doesn't have to be fancy. It's just things you do that help you release and return to your baseline. Whatever your baseline is, you identify your baseline. Whatever it is, it's those things that help you to return to your baseline. And that can be for your life, period, right? So what are some coping techniques that we use as therapists? These are things we use in sessions. So y'all are getting some great information. Listen, y'all didn't have to pay the money. Y'all are here. So God bless. So we have writing, and people call this grief journals, right? So you can write in your grief journal. If you don't want to call it a grief journal and it becomes too overwhelming, you can call it a journal of memories, a journal of thoughts and feelings. And you can also write a letter. And I want to point this out because this is really important. For those of us that have experienced sudden loss, right? It just happened out of nowhere. You didn't have a chance to say goodbye. Or for those of us that are in COVID right now, right? Who have experienced a loss, like if you experienced a loss where you didn't get a chance to have graduation, or you lost your job, and during this time you didn't get a chance to say goodbye to your coworkers, whatever it may be, writing a letter directly to that thing or that person that you lost, and share your unfinished feelings that you may have. Whatever feelings you may have towards that thing or that person, write it in a letter. Write it in a letter. You can put it, you can envelope it, you can address it to the person, and you can just put it in your desk or in your office. If, and you don't necessarily, you can put it wherever. You can go and you can release it into the air. You can go to the bridge and release it into the water, whatever it may be. But writing a letter is very powerful. If you can't speak to that thing or that person, but you want your feelings, you want to unleash your feelings, it's important to be able to do that. I like morning pages. So we got, yes, thank you so much, Sharon. Yes, writing sometimes is so powerful. Drawing. I'm not a drawer, but there are a lot of my friends that are very artistic, and for them, writing is not helpful, but to be able to draw their grief, whatever that looks like, is really, really helpful. So maybe for some of you, maybe you're not you weren't necessarily the most artsy person, but it can be helpful sometimes to just be able to draw out your feelings. And whatever comes, just like get a piece of paper, get some crayons, get some markers, get some paint. If you want to stick your hand on a paint and just put everything, you want to just, whatever, maybe whatever comes out, just allow yourself to create that outlet or that release. This is one that my spiritual father mentioned to me, but find photos that describe the loss. And if it's a loved one, you bring a photo of the loved one, or if it's a person, or if it's your school, whatever it may be, your job, and write down the feelings. So next to that photo, you can get a sheet of paper and write down the feelings that are attached to that, right? And do this activity once a week, just once a week, not every week, not every day. You can do it every day if you want to, but at least once a week. And I say that because you can start to measure, right? 1 week, how you're feeling, and the next week, how you're feeling now that you've looked at that photo. And keep a journal and say, wow, this is what you're documenting. Oh, this week I feel anger. This week I feel sadness. This week I feel like I'm coming to terms with it. Whatever it may be, whatever thoughts come out next to that photo, start writing those things down. So perfect. Someone mentioned I do intentional walking and breathing. And this is a really great one. Number 4. Identify a time in the day that you allow yourself to fall apart and then engage in an activity that brings you joy. The reason why that's so important is because for some of us, we have the fear, and I mentioned this to you earlier, that we don't want to deal with our grief and our loss and our pain and our emotions because we don't want to fall apart. So you feel nervous that you're going to fall apart one day at the wrong place and at the wrong time, but there's really no really wrong place or wrong time to fall apart. I mean, obviously, maybe probably not at your job, but identify a time every single day where you can just break down and cry. Say, look, on Mondays at this time, I'm going to allow myself to just completely release whatever that looks like. So if I cry, if I yell, if I cuss, whatever it is. And then, because you've exhausted so much of your feelings and your emotions, engage in something that brings you joy. Watch a television show that makes you laugh. Go on a bike ride, call a friend that makes you laugh. Go hang out with your spouse, if you got a spouse or a partner, whatever it may be. Engage in an activity that will bring you joy, but identify a time in the day. And people can do this also. For a side note, if you are experiencing a lot of stress and you're worrying about something, if you're worrying about pain, just to not allow worry to take over your entire life. A really great technique is just finding one time in the day that you just allow yourself to worry for 1 hour. You're like, I'm just going to allow myself to think of the worst situations, to worry just in this 1 hour. And then I'm going to release it and I'm going to walk away and re-engage in life, because life is still happening, y'all. Yes, Lucy said, measure your growth. Because sometimes what's really important is that you don't even realize how far you've come, right? You don't even realize how far you've come. And it's important to celebrate. It's important to celebrate. And you can only sometimes be able to do that when you document your growth. Number 5, create an altar of memory or a memory book to both remember and acknowledge that person. Especially during COVID right now, having not had a funeral, creating a little altar. And I know it's not like you can change language if you're uncomfortable with the idea of altar, but just a place where their photos, their favorite things kind of reside and create space. Sometimes people have, kind of keep the room the same. Eventually, I think one of the great ways is, as you move forward, when you are ready, be able to take down the room and repurpose it and make it something else. But in the meantime, creating a space in your home where their memories are there. You can create a memory book with their photos. Directed imagery and the empty chair technique. Now, listen, this one is often done in therapy sessions. And so I would suggest that if you try to engage in this, one, be prepared for the emotions that will come. But directed imagery, one, you can just imagine, and this is the same, they're kind of similar in the sense, but you can imagine that the thing or that person is in front of you. You can close your eyes and you can speak to that person or that thing, right? This really works for, the empty chair technique really kind of works for an individual, like if it's the loss of a loved one. And if you haven't felt like you've dealt with certain things, or you felt like you didn't, in the writing a letter is not helpful. You don't want to write. You can sit them down. You can have an empty chair. That's usually the concept. And by having an empty chair in front of you, what essentially you do in that moment is, when you set the scene and you say, I've invited such and such, whoever it may be, in this room. And then you begin speaking. And I would probably say in those moments, be very aware of what's happening in your body as you're speaking to that person. Be aware of what feelings are coming up, what emotions that you're naming. Name those emotions. I would say write down how that experience felt afterwards, right? With the empty chair technique. But definitely, I would definitely say do a little bit more research. But if you've been in therapy sessions before, this is definitely a great technique to engage in. And then, like I said, it can be it can be a lot emotionally after you do this empty chair technique where you're speaking to someone. And this can also be for someone that's alive, that maybe you haven't necessarily told them how you feel about them, and you want to, and you're not ready to tell them to their face. But this can be another opportunity for you to engage them in sort of this idea of an empty chair, where you can still say how you feel. And then the 7 and 8 are guided walks of remembrance, especially if you're still in like a city where, that person, like if you grew up in New York City and your family is in New York City, you can take a walk, and maybe you as a family can take a walk and remember places where you guys shared moments. Take this walk and outline the walk, right? outline different points of the places. It could be like, yo, we used to always be at Harlem Tavern together. That's one of our pit stops. We always used to be in Central Park at this place. We're going to go over there. And in each place, you can create ceremonial experiences and moments where you just honor, either in silence or in words, those memories that happened in that guided walk, right? So make, a guided walk of remembrance is really, really powerful. And then 8, Pastor Kendra shared this with me. She was like a silent scream. I talked about this last week a little bit, but a lot of us, we have emotions, and a lot of times some of the best things is just like, we just need to just get it out. A silent scream, just what it is. You silently scream. You open up your mouth, you go, and you just like, are in silently screaming out all that you're feeling. Now, if you are in a space where it's safe and no one is going to think that something is happening to you, just actually scream. But if you're not, you can silently scream. And I also mentioned this idea of throwing things. If you're angry or if you're frustrated and you're experiencing that emotion, you're just so angry with God, you're so angry with yourself, you're angry with whatever, as opposed to just sitting in that, release it. If you can throw something at the wall, throw a ball. If you got some, dishes that you don't want anymore, throw some dishes to the wall, whatever you want, you can do that. And the last one is Repurposed Grief. And this one is really powerful as well, because this really shows up for folks who have experienced the loss of a loved one or in anything, right? And I'm going to give 2 examples. You experienced the loss of a loved one, and it might have been in a tragic way. It might have been to an accident. This really happened with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, right? People who experience that type of loss, right? A loved one, a child, to drunk driving. What happens is they repurpose their grief and put it in towards something positive, their energies. So they want to find a way where they feel like they're giving back. And it's a way for them to take control of that moment. And that's really powerful. You can start a nonprofit. I know when Kobe Bryant passed away, they raised money for his foundation. These are ways that you repurpose your grief. I know a lot of our folks from who have been coming to Pantry, some of them have been furloughed and not working, and for them, they repurpose their grief by saying, I'm going to come to Pantry. I'm going to give back. This is what I'm going to do. This is my gift. I may not be working right now. I may not be in the city. This is actually all across sort of the United States, but I'm grieving right now, but I can repurpose my grief into something powerful. And so this is a powerful way to cope and to kind of deal with the loss, because you're still kind of in it, right? You're still in it. You're still experiencing it. And so you can definitely, that's a great way as well. Now, some digital tools, and I wanted to mention digital tools because right now we're not able to physically be together. And these are great ways for you to digitally engage and how you can cope with losses. One, creating a Facebook memorial page. This really kind of works for if you've lost a loved one. You can create a memorial page, and then you can go there every single day and write your notes. You can call it love notes, notes of tears, notes of memories. And you can also then, when you're ready, invite other people to share memories. And it can be really helpful to see how that person, and this is where you begin to see the optimism, right? The redefining the loss and seeing the beauty in it and seeing, wow, this person really impacted someone's life. And so being able to see how your loved one, especially like you get to see when your parents, sometimes you don't ever fully know just like what force of nature they were until you experience their loss and you're at the funeral and people come up to you and start telling you stories of how they impacted you. I've done funerals and people have come up to me and been like, wow, they share stories about this person and things that I didn't even know. And it's really powerful because it just reminds you just how amazing they were. And it can bring you joy and it can bring you a sense of peace. So creating a Facebook memorial page is really beautiful as well. I know Zoom right now has become a very popular concept. I would say this in the interim, but definitely hosting a Zoom memorial service, or you don't have to call it a memorial service if you've already had the moment, but a memory service. You can name it whatever it is. Be creative as possible. It can be something attached to who that person was, right? So if they were a basketball person, they loved Kobe Bryant, they had a Mamba mentality. You can call it the Mamba mentality service to honor their life, but be creative. You have an opportunity to engage their life, bring forth who they were to this service. You know, you're not limited. See the ways of how technology can advance and allow you to be creative in how you remember this person. And I know a lot of ways they've been doing is they've been having graduation services online, and that's also been very powerful as well. So making sure we engage in that too. And so I'm going to give you 2 digital communities that you can connect to online beyond this moment. So if you find yourself, I just really don't have a great support system, or if you want to find a stronger support system, these are 2 in the document. So I hope you get a chance to see the document. It has 2 different online communities that you can connect to. One is Open to Hope. Open to Hope is an online website. It's actually a nonprofit where people can share inspirational stories of loss and love. And you can go on that page and share your experiences of loss and love, right? And you can also read inspirational stories from other people who have probably experienced a very similar loss to you. So make sure you go on that website if you see, and they also have really great resources, additional articles, different coping mechanisms. So make sure you go to that website, Open to Hope, www.opentohope.com. Someone wants to write it in the chat, feel free to do that, but www.opentohope.com. You can also see it in the document as well. And then the last group is Heal to Grieve. And Heal to Grieve, once again, is just a social support network. And you can go on there and you can light a candle for a loved one that you lost. And this is one for us to be able to name the person and to be able to make sure that they're seen. And I think when you're in pandemics or when we have like hurricanes or natural disasters, oftentimes you just see a number, right? You just see 5,000 people lost their life. Now, if a part of that 5,000 people is you, or these last couple of weeks, you've been seeing unemployment numbers, right? And when you see 22 million people lost their job, I mean, that just hits us like a ton of brick. 22 million people is a lot of people, but you are a part of that 22 million, right? You might be a part of that 22 million people. And your life matters. We don't know the narrative and the story of how your loss is impacting you, right? How you're struggling to feed your family. Name that, say that. You're not just a number, you are a person with a story that is being impacted. So you want to share that as well. And so you can, in these support groups, name yourself, name your story, your narrative as not being just a number. So the website for that one is Heal to Grieve. So www.healtogrieve. I believe it's .org and not .com. But I can make sure to, actually was like looking it up just to make sure, but Heal to Grieve. So make sure you go on the document to find that organization. You also can Google it as well. And so this is your invitation for participation, and I'm going to couple it with the homework because we are 8:40 p.m. and I want to make sure that you guys can kind of get this opportunity to kind of reflect, because these last 2 weeks have been a lot, right? It's a lot of information that's kind of been put at you. But like I said, you're here, which means that there is a level of an intentionality to say, I want to grow and I want to heal. So I thank you for doing that work. So if you want to, in the document, take this opportunity to identify what your coping style has been, how you've coped, what are some different coping mechanisms that have worked for you. And then for this homework, over the next several weeks, over the next week and the several weeks, begin to try to different coping mechanisms, right? Because I mentioned earlier, not everything works for everyone. It's all different. And you want to locate the one that fits for you, right? And when you find that coping style that works for you, for how you are mourning your loss, share that with someone, a friend or a family. Put it on Facebook. Email me if you want to at hbrahane@fcbcnyc.org. Share it with someone, because I want to celebrate. We want to celebrate with you that you have found something that allows you to get back to a place of baseline. That's something worthy to celebrate, that you have done the work, you have been intentional. And so once again, not limited to, if you have something new that's working for you, that is different from the ones that I posted, share on Facebook, share with your friends, share with your family. But over these next couple of weeks, try these different coping styles, right? And then share with a friend or a family, share with myself, share with the FCBC on the Facebook page, whatever it might be, so that we can celebrate with you in this moment. So that is the end of my presentation of my last 2 weeks. These last 2 weeks have been so amazing. And I am so grateful for those of you guys that have joined me for part 1 and part 2. Once again, I'm going to try to see if you need the documents, send me an email. My email's on the website once again. And we will get those documents to you if you weren't able to get them via the website. But I'm so grateful for you, and I'm so grateful for this class. And we will do this again, because once again, grief and loss is not something that happens just during Corona, during COVID. It happens continuous, it's a part of life. And so we'll revisit this again. So if you feel like you need a refresher, we will do this one more. We will definitely be doing this multiple times. So once again, at the bottom are resources for those of you guys that feel like you need someone to talk to more. If you don't have a therapist and there's a crisis text line, there's a phone line. So make sure you engage in those resources as well if you just need someone to talk to. So let's pray and let's close out tonight's session. God, we thank you right now, Lord, for everyone that joined us over the last 2 weeks. God, we thank you for just being with us in this journey of how we mourn. God, I know that it's not easy, but your presence is with us. God, I know it's not easy to walk this journey of intentionality to say, God, I want to feel my pain. I want to grow to a place of healing. But God, we thank you for being present with us in this moment. So right now, God, as you touch each individual, God, that has come through this digital stream today, Lord, I pray that you are with them. God, I pray that you allow them to begin to see the things that they were not able to see before. God, I pray that this information helps to educate them and empower them, God, to know that they are capable of walking this journey towards healing. God, we love you and we honor you in this moment. We thank you for everyone. We thank you for this church family. We thank you for everyone that has joined us. Continue to bless them and protect them and bring them hope and love. It's in your precious name we pray. Amen. 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 God bless you all. I love you, and I look forward to seeing you again, hopefully soon, another spiritual formation class. If you have any questions, make sure to reach out to me via email, and make sure to stay engaged with all the things that are happening here at FCBC. Love y'all.